Hi, welcome back to another episode of Sankofa Pan African series. In this episode, I'll be looking at the decline of ancient Egypt's old kingdom and the rise of Nubia and Kush. Now, things became compounded in Egypt around 3184 BC when King Amenemhet IV died without leaving a successor. The tradition at the time was that power was inherited through the daughter of the pharaoh. However, the daughter of the pharaoh was not allowed to use her inherited power to rule. Rather, she was expected to transmit her royal prerogative to her husband, who then became the pharaoh. As such, the tradition was that a serving pharaoh would be succeeded by his son-in-law. This tradition forced pharaohs to be creative about how they protected their lineage. For instance, generations of pharaohs protected their lineage by having their oldest daughters marry their oldest sons, so that the king's sons were also their sons-in-law and could therefore succeed them. The beginning of the decline of ancient Egypt can be traced to one of such marriages. Amenemhet IV followed this tradition by marrying his sister named Sobeneferu, but unfortunately he died before he could have any children. Sobeneferu was then expected to marry another man from her noble Theban family, but she went against traditions by marrying a commoner from Lower Egypt. Now, let me quickly pause by stopping to claim this woman as the first recorded African feminist. The way I imagine it is that Sobeneferu probably came to the conclusion after her brother's husband's death that she wanted a shot at using the power which was bestowed on her by birth. So, she chose to rule rather than hand over power to another noble member of her Theban family. She did what, to my mind, any smart woman would do. She married a commoner and reigned as pharaoh. According to Kim Reiholt, Sobeneferu was the last ruler of the 12th dynasty of Egypt, and she ruled for about 4 years, from about 1806 to 1802 BC. Unfortunately, she died without leaving any children and is the first recorded female pharaoh. It is possible that the commoner that she married, or members of his family who were from Lower Egypt, tried to take over the throne after her death. Egypt was then plunged into a civil war because the Theban nobility refused to be ruled by a commoner from Lower Egypt. This war became protracted, lasting about 100 years, during which Egypt was divided into two dynasties. One was run by Theban nobility in Thebes, the other run by monarchs from Lower Egypt in Memphis. This, of course, left Egypt vulnerable enough to be attacked by other groups such as the Hyksos, who were nomads from Asia. The Hyksos first conquered Lower Egypt and then moved in on Thebes. They then held the whole of Egypt captive for about 150 years. The reign of the Hyksos forced members of the Theban nobility to move southwards into Nubia in order to organize an underground liberation movement which worked to progressively chip away the authority of the Hyksos. First, they managed to retake Thebes, from which they then ousted the Hyksos, thereby beginning what is known as the New Kingdom. The pharaohs of this new kingdom then developed Egypt into its greatest period. Egypt became the major power in the world around that time. It engaged in trade with all the major commercial centers which had then started to develop. It imported timber from Syria and built large vessels with which sailors could travel to East Africa. Egypt engaged in trade with Punt, which laid southeast of Egypt, from where Egypt imported ivory, ebony, spices, and gold. Thebes became expanded with magnificent mansions built by the nobility. According to C.V. Vilna, some of these mansions had as many as 50 to 60 rooms. They had walls and halls covered in exquisite artworks and were decorated with expensive furniture and sculptures. Finally, according to one account, in 761 BC, Egypt was conquered by an Ethiopian king named Pianki. Between this period, which marks the beginning of Pianki's reign, and 525 BC, Egypt was ruled by various pharaohs and suffered attacks by different groups, including Assyrians. It continued to face attacks from Persia and remained under Persian control until 332 BC, when Alexander the Macedonian, also known as Alexander the Great, a Greek, conquered it and left the Ptolemies to rule till 30 BC, when Egypt came fully under the Roman Empire. It was the Greeks who built the famous city of Alexandria as a tribute to Alexander the Macedonian. Some of the enduring innovations which ancient Egypt bestowed the world are writing, paper, ink, pen, the calendar with the lunar year, which was made up of 354 days, which is just 11 days shorter than the solar year. Egypt also left us the foundations of the zodiac system and several other innovations, too numerous to mention here. Let's now take a look at two other great African kingdoms and empires, starting with Egypt's neighbors, Nubia. Now, Egypt's closest neighbors were Nubians. The origin of the name Nubia is now obscure. Some have linked it to Nub, spelled NWB, an ancient Egyptian word for gold. The area known as Nubia in ancient times covered most parts of northeastern Africa. It extended from the Nile River Valley and went eastwards to the shores of the Red Sea. The southern part of Nubia covered present-day Khartoum in the Sudan, and the western part of it is the area which now covers the Libyan desert. The Nubians developed powerful kingdoms. One was Kush, which had its first capital at Kerma and later at Napata. Meroe was another Nubian kingdom. I will come back to it, to Meroe later. Now, the Encyclopedia Britannica suggests that Nubia was divided into two regions. The southern portion, which extended north to the southern end of the Nile River, was known as Upper Nubia. This was where Kush was established under the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty in Egypt. Kush was called Ethiopia by the ancient Greeks. Lower Nubia was the northern part of the region and was located near Aswan. The vast area which constituted Nubia is believed to have become populated by African people from the Sahara region. They began to move towards the Nile around 5000 BC as I said in an earlier episode. According to archaeologists, Nubia emerged as a farming region around 3500 BC. And there is evidence to suggest that there were interactions between Egypt and Nubia and other Nilotic regions in the south from very early in human history. Ancient sub-Saharan Africans brought with them the art of making pottery to Nubia. It is believed that Nubians were initially mostly herdsmen and hunters of large animals. They eventually became fishermen and farmers. As time progressed, other people moved into the region from sub-Saharan Africa, so that Nubia's population was often a diverse mix of African peoples. In addition to herding cattle, which was a sign of wealth and social status, Nubians who were farmers grew grains, peas, lentils, dates, and possibly melons. One interesting fact about Nubia is that, in spite of all the debates about the race of the people responsible for the Egyptian civilization, Nubia has always been perceived as a land of black people. Even after Egypt became mixed as a result of various migrations, Egyptians clearly depicted Nubians as people with darker skin, while the Greeks and Romans called them Ethiopians in reference to their skin color. Egyptian sources sometimes referred to Nubia as Ta Seti, or the land of the bow, because Nubians were famous for their skill as archers. Nubia played a prominent role in the Egyptian army at various times. In addition to the bow, Nubians used the sword and the javelin. Other Nubians also served as agricultural laborers in Egypt, but became assimilated into Egyptian sociocultural life. Nubians mined carnelian, a glassy, translucent semi-precious stone, gold, and other minerals. They bartered these as well as cattle, ivory, animal skins, hardwood, incense, and dates in trade with the Egyptians for grain, vegetable oil, wine, beer, linen, and other manufactured goods. Nubia was the gateway through which a lot of products like incense, ivory, and ebony traveled from their sources in sub-Saharan Africa to Egypt and onto the Mediterranean. Nubia also traded extensively by selling ivory to Byzantium and copper and gold to Ethiopia, another of Egypt's neighbors. Nubian merchant caravans traveled deep into the heart of Africa, as far as areas which fall within present-day Nigeria and Ghana. They traveled in rowing boats and on camels to trade for goods. Evidence of houses with more than one story, which historians believe might have been built for defensive purposes, have been found in Nubia. Some areas even had pipe-borne water. Walls of stone have also been found in Nubian villages, which are believed to have been built to protect inhabitants against Arab invaders. Sometimes villagers built up communal stores in which they saved food against Arab sieges. Nubia was the major link between the Great Lakes and the Congo Basin of Central Africa, as well as the Mediterranean. According to S. Adam and O. J. Vercout, the position of the Nile Valley in relation to the Red Sea, the Saharan Desert, and the Arabian Desert facilitated direct contact with the rest of Africa. Now, we'll quickly look at the relationship between Egypt and Nubia from about 7000 BC. which, according to S. Adam and O.J. Vercourt, there appears to have been a common material culture throughout Nubia. The edge of the Ethiopian highlands and as far as the middle of Egypt. Adam and Vercourt suggest that differences between the civilizations of Lower Egypt and that of Upper Nubia only began to appear around 3000 BC. They point to similarities in funeral customs, pottery, stone, and metal instruments found in these areas, which therefore lead to conclusions about similarities in social organizations, religious beliefs, and general way of life, such as hunting, fishing, animal husbandry, and other forms of agricultural practices at that time. However, writing appeared in Egypt around 3200 BC, while Nubia is believed to have remained a predominantly oral culture. It is believed that the evolution of writing was necessary in Egypt because Egyptians had to develop a highly centralized political system which was needed to run their irrigation system. In the south, the communities of Nubia, with their oral culture, maintained a social and political organization which was still based on a smaller based on smaller political units, and so did not have the same urgency to develop writing. Some researchers also believe that it was the need for a highly centralized system of irrigation that was necessary to feed the large population of Egypt, which led to the evolution of a centralized monarchic system of organization. The two civilizations, Egypt and Nubia, are believed to have complemented one another economically, and this facilitated exchanges between them. However, from around 3200 BC, under the first dynasty, Egyptians started sending troops into Nubia to find raw materials such as wood, which were lacking or becoming scarce in Egypt due to its increasing population. So by this time, Egypt had lost the belt of forest which in former times lined the banks of the Nile River, because the lower Nile became increasingly incorporated into the irrigation system. Egypt also needed to keep an open passage southwards in order to have access to incense, gum, ivory, ebony, and panthers, which were in abundance further south in sub-Saharan Africa. The first capital of Kush, a Nubian empire, is believed to have been Kerma, where ancient burial mounds have been found, which suggest that they were the burial places of very powerful native rulers who had commercial and diplomatic relationships with the Hyksos kings who ruled Egypt after the Hyksos invaders took over power there. The rulers of the Nubian kingdom were called Prince of Kush. One of such one evidence points to one of such great rulers. This evidence is found in the first stele of Chamos. The stele is a stone slab with inscriptions detailing the achievements of rulers as powerful as Chamos. Chamos was the last king of the 7th dynasty in Egypt, and probably the first king who mounted an organized resistance against the Hyksos invaders. This slab also depicts the political situation in the Nile Valley at that time. It shows evidence of an independent kingdom of Kush. The Encyclopedia Britannica also reports that around 2575 BC, the Egyptian pharaoh Snefru conducted a raid into Nubia in order to establish an Egyptian outpost there. And by the 6th dynasty, Egyptians were carrying out long-range trading expeditions, sometimes combined with military raids. Eventually, the Nubian chiefs united against these Egyptian expeditions. They too started making incursions into Egypt. They wanted to retaliate. They eventually broke through Egyptian borders around the 13th century, around the 13th dynasty, advancing northwards in 1650 BC. They took advantages of the invasion of the Hyksos to raid Upper Egypt, from where they carted monuments that they carried off to their capital. Eventually, the Theban nobles who were fighting to retake power from the Hyksos tried to form an alliance with the Kushites, who rejected their advances. However, Egyptian nobles were still able to penetrate Kush in order to form a guerrilla movement with which they fought against the Hyksos, as I mentioned earlier. During the process of expelling the Hyksos, the Thebans simultaneously continued to penetrate Nubia, and between 1514 and 1493 BC, they conquered the capital city, thereby colonizing a good chunk of Nubian area. One of the main attractions which made Egypt colonize Kush was its gold and other precious metals. After colonization, the Encyclopedia Britannica reports that although Nubians became gradually Egyptianized, Nubia broke away to form its own kingdom around 800 BC. Kush then conquered all of Egypt around 715 BC, ending the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th dynasties by founding the 25th dynasty. The 25th dynasty is called Kushite in the king's list. It is also sometimes referred to as Ethiopian dynasty by some historians. The kingdom was so powerful that in 701 BC, the Hebrew king Hezekiah sought and got the help of a Kushite king named Shabaka to help him revolt against Assyria. I will continue with the 25th dynasty under Kush in the next episode. Please, once again, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you have not yet done so. Like it and feel free to share with your friends. See you next time.